The wind on Sable's Reach did not blow like wind on Earth. It came in long, low waves that pushed dust across the valley and made the metal fences sing a thin, sad note. Dana Whitlock had stopped noticing that sound months ago. She sat inside the small listening station with a cup of cold tea in her hand, watching a wall of screens that mostly showed nothing at all. This was her job. Watch the signals. Report the quiet. Wait for something to happen, even though nothing ever did. That night, something did happen. The storm came fast, the way storms always did on this world. One moment the sky was clear and full of strange green stars, and the next it was a wall of moving cloud, lit up from inside by flashes of ion light. Dana had seen storms before. She knew to seal the shutters and wait it out. But halfway through sealing the last window, she heard something over the wind. A sound like a small animal crying. She should have ignored it. Station rules said not to go outside during a storm for any reason. But the sound came again, closer, and something in her chest would not let her sit still. She grabbed a torch and a coat and pushed the outer door open against the wind. Near the broken section of the perimeter fence, half buried in blown dust, she found it. A small creature, no bigger than a large dog, with folded wings pressed tight against its body and skin the color of wet stone. It was shaking. One of its wings looked bent in a way wings should not bend. When the torchlight hit its eyes, it did not run. It was too weak to run. Dana wrapped it in her coat without thinking twice and carried it back inside. She had read files about the native life on Sable's Reach before taking this posting, the way everyone was supposed to. For the next 2 weeks, Dana broke almost every rule in the station handbook. She used medical supplies meant for humans to splint the small wing. She shared her food rations, guessing at what the creature could eat by watching what it sniffed at and what it turned away from. She did not report the creature to command, because she knew what would happen if she did. They would send someone to remove it, or study it, or worse. She told herself she would report it later. Later never came. The creature made a small clicking sound whenever it was hungry, or scared, or simply wanted attention. Dana started calling it Kiv, because that was the closest she could get to writing down the sound with her own mouth. By the 3rd week, Kiv could walk again. By the 6th week, it could flap its wings, though not well enough to fly. It followed Dana everywhere inside the station, from the control room to the small kitchen to the narrow bunk where she slept. At night, it curled up on the floor beside her bed, and Dana found she did not mind the company. The station had felt too quiet for too long. She built a proper shelter outside, close to the main building, using spare panels from a storage crate. She taught it simple habits, though she was never sure how much it truly understood. When the supply shuttle came once a month, its engines roaring as it dropped through the atmosphere, Kiv would run to the edge of the landing pad and wait, watching the sky, its small body tense with excitement. It did not understand what a shuttle was for. It only understood that when the sky made that sound, exciting things sometimes arrived. Dana laughed the first time she saw it do that, and after that, it became routine. Every shuttle day, Kiv waited by the pad. Weeks turned in. She did. For now, there was only the wind, the station, and the two of them, together at the edge of a quiet world, neither one guessing what was coming. A red light does not need words to tell you something is wrong. Dana learned that the moment the comm panel lit up in the middle of the night, pulling her out of sleep before the alarm even finished its first tone. Kiv stirred on the floor beside her bed, lifting its head, sensing the change in her before she had even opened her eyes. The message was short. All non-essential personnel were to evacuate immediately. Hostile forces had broken through a defense line 3 systems away, closer than anyone expected, and Sable's Reach sat too near the edge of that advance to be considered safe. A shuttle was already on its way. It would arrive in 4 hours. There would not be a second one. Dana read the message twice, then a 3rd time, as if the words might change if she looked hard enough. They did not. She moved fast after that, the kind of fast that does not leave room for thinking too much. She packed only what mattered: files, a few personal items, the small metal box where she kept letters from home. Kiv followed her from room to room, clicking softly, confused by the sudden rush after so many slow, ordinary days. It had never seen her move like this before. It was only when she reached the door with her bag over her shoulder that the full weight of what was happening hit her. She could not take Kiv. The evacuation shuttle was a military transport, not built for passengers who were not human. and certainly not built for a creature the size of Kiv, who was still growing, still afraid of loud engine noise, still liable to panic in tight spaces. She had seen him flinch and hide during smaller ship landings before. A military evacuation, loud and rushed and full of strangers, would terrify him. And Station Command would never approve bringing an unlisted alien life form onto a defense transport, not during an emergency, not ever. Dana stood at the door for a long moment, her hand on the frame, her chest tight. She tried anyway. She led Kiv toward the landing pad an hour before the shuttle was due, hoping that somehow, some way, this would work out. But when the shuttle's engines roared down through the clouds, brighter and louder than any supply ship had ever been, Kiv bolted. He ran from the noise and hid behind the storage shed, wings pressed flat, whole body shaking. Dana called his name, but he would not come out. The shuttle pilot's voice crackled over her calm, sharp and urgent, telling her they had 6 minutes on the ground and could not wait longer. She had to choose. Dana walked to the shed. She crouched down in front of Kiv, who was still trembling, his eyes wide and fixed on her. She did not have the words to explain war, or orders, or distance, or time. She only had her voice, and the tone she used when she wanted him to feel safe. "I have to go," she said, keeping her voice as calm and steady as she could make it, even though her hands were shaking just as much as his wings. "But I am coming back. I promise you, Kiv. I will come back for you." He tilted his head at the sound of her voice, the way he always did, listening not to the words themselves but to the shape of them, the warmth underneath them. She did not know if he understood any of it. She hoped, somehow, that the feeling behind the words would be enough. She pulled a strip of cloth from her uniform sleeve and tied it to the fence post nearest the landing pad. A small, foolish gesture, but it was the only marker she had time to leave. Something of hers, staying behind, a promise made physical. The shuttle pilot called again, this time with real anger in his voice. Dana stood, forced her legs to move, and ran for the ship without looking back, because she knew if she looked back, she would not be able to leave at all. The doors sealed behind her. The engines roared louder than anything Kiv had ever heard, and through a small viewport, Dana caught one last glimpse of him, standing at the edge of the landing pad, ears flat, wings half spread, watching the ship rise into a sky that was quickly swallowing it whole. She did not cry until the station was nothing but a gray dot far below, and then a memory, and then nothing at all. Kiv stood alone on the pad for a long time after the sound had faded completely, staring up at an empty sky that had taken the only person he had ever trusted, without giving him any way to understand why. Seasons do not care whether someone is waiting for them to pass. On Sable's Reach, the dry months came and went, then the storm months, then the dry months again, and each time the cycle turned, Kiv grew a little larger, his wings a little stronger, though no one was there to notice or measure it. He kept the shelter Dana built for him. He slept there every night, in the same corner, even after wind and dust had worn holes in the panels. Each morning, before the light had fully climbed over the eastern ridge, he walked the same path to the landing pad and sat down at its edge, facing the sky, waiting. He did not know how to count days. He only knew the shape of his own routine, the same one he had followed since the loud ship took her away. Wake. Walk to the pad. Wait. Watch the sky change color as the sun crossed overhead. Wait longer. When the light began to fade and the first stars appeared, he would return to the shelter, curl into the corner, and sleep, ready to begin again the next morning. The strip of cloth Dana had tied to the fence post had long since faded and torn in the wind, reduced to a few thin threads that still, somehow, held on. He was not entirely alone, though he did not know it for a long while. Deep in the valley below the station lived an old man named Yannick, who had once worked a mining outpost 3 ridges over before it closed, and left him with nowhere else he wanted to be. He had heard about the station's creature from traders passing through, a strange story about a young engineer and a wild animal she had raised like a pet. Most people who heard the story assumed the creature had died or wandered off once the station emptied. Yannick was curious enough to walk up one day and see for himself. What he found surprised him. A large, strange, dragon-like animal, calm and quiet, sitting at the edge of an abandoned landing pad as if it were still expecting a ship to arrive. Yannick did not try to approach it directly. He had lived long enough on frontier worlds to know that trust was not something you could rush, especially with an animal that had already lost someone it loved. Instead, he began leaving food near the tree line, a little closer each week, never staying to watch it be eaten, never trying to touch or call to the creature. He simply gave it what it needed and let it decide the rest. Over time, Kiv learned the sound of the old man's slow footsteps and stopped hiding when he heard them. He never let Yannick get close enough to touch him, but he stopped running away either. It became its own quiet arrangement, one that asked nothing of either of them beyond a kind of distant company. Yannick tried talking to him sometimes, the way people talk to animals that cannot answer back. He told Kiv about the mines he used to work, about the family he had lost touch with decades ago, about how strange it was that two abandoned things could end up keeping each other silent company at the edge of an empty world. Kiv listened, tilting his head the way he always had, understanding little of the words but recognizing, perhaps, the shape of loneliness in another voice. But every morning, no matter how comfortable the arrangement with Yannick became, Kiv still walked to the landing pad. He still sat facing the sky. He still waited. Yannick asked him once, more to himself than to the creature, why he kept doing it after so long. He did not expect an answer, and he did not get one. Only the same steady patience Kiv showed every single day, watching an empty sky for a ship that never came. What neither of them knew was that far away, across systems torn apart by war, someone was fighting just as hard, in a very different way, to make sure that patience would not be wasted forever. But that fight was still years from finished, and on Sable's reach, the only thing that mattered was the next sunrise, and the walk to the pad, and the waiting that had become the entire shape of a young creature's life. War does not ask permission before it changes a person's life, and it did not ask Dana Whitlock either. In the years after the evacuation, she stopped being a station engineer and became something else entirely, a name on supply manifests, a voice on crowded comm channels, a person who filled out request forms so many times that the words began to blur together in her sleep. She had tried, in the first months, to go back. She had asked her superiors directly, then filed formal requests, then asked again. Every answer was the same. Sable's reach sat inside a contested zone. No civilian or non-essential travel was permitted. The area was too dangerous, too unstable, too far from any priority the war effort cared about. A small listening station with no strategic value was not worth the fuel or the risk. Dana understood the logic. She hated it anyway. She could have accepted a transfer to a quieter post somewhere far from the fighting. Plenty of people in her position did exactly that. Instead, she moved in the opposite direction, deeper into the chaos, because she had realized something important. The people who controlled supply routes were the people who decided which sectors got reopened first and which ones stayed sealed. If she wanted any real chance of returning to Sable's reach, she needed to be one of those people. It took years. She trained in logistics command, learned to manage fleets of transport ships, learned the political games that decided which requests moved forward and which ones sat buried in approval queues forever. She made enemies doing it. Officers who resented a former station tech pushing her way into rooms she was not expected to reach. She also made allies, and the most important one was a man named Elias Rourke. Rourke had been her commanding officer during the early years of the war, a serious, quiet man who did not believe in wasted effort or wasted people. He noticed Dana's work before most others did. The way she solved supply problems others called impossible. The way she never stopped pushing for access to a small, forgotten sector that no one else cared about. When he finally asked her why, she told him the truth about the station, about Kiv, about the promise she had made and never gotten to keep. He did not laugh at her, which surprised her more than she expected. "You've been fighting this war for that animal the whole time," he said, not as an accusation, simply as an observation. "I've been fighting this war because it's my job," Dana answered. "But yes, I want to go back. I need to." Rourke helped her after that, not by breaking rules, but by knowing which rules mattered and which ones could bend. He put her name forward for postings that placed her closer to the contested sectors. He backed her requests when they crossed his desk. He warned her, more than once, that chasing this one small goal could cost her the career she had built, that command would not look kindly on an officer who seemed more interested in a personal mission than the larger war effort. Dana listened to every warning, and pressed forward anyway. The years were not easy ones. She was injured twice, once seriously enough to spend 2 months in a medical bay recovering from a hull breach during a supply run gone wrong. Then, finally, the war began to shift. A long, brutal push by Allied forces broke the enemy's hold on several key systems, and slowly, sector by sector, restricted zones began to reopen. Dana tracked the changes obsessively, checking status reports the moment they were released, until one report finally contained the words she had been waiting 6 long years to read. Sable's Reach sector, cleared for limited resupply access. She read it standing in a crowded logistics office, surrounded by people who had no idea what those words meant to her. She sat down slowly at her desk, hands shaking, and allowed herself, for the first time in years, to believe that going back was no longer just a distant hope. It was, finally, something she could actually do. Getting a seat on the first resupply shuttle back to Sable's Reach took more effort than Dana had expected, even after 6 years of preparing for exactly this moment. The mission itself was small, a routine cargo run to check on the sealed station and drop basic equipment for a future survey team. It was not meant to carry passengers who had personal reasons for being there. Rourke, now a senior officer with enough influence to make things happen, pulled the last favor Dana would ever ask of him and got her a spot on the crew manifest as a support technician. He warned her one final time, in his usual blunt way, that if this trip cost her the career she had worked so hard to build, there would be no undoing it. "I know," Dana said. "I don't care." The shuttle ride felt longer than any flight she had taken in years, though it lasted only a few hours. She stared out the small viewport the entire time, watching the stars shift as the ship dropped closer to a planet she had not seen since the night she left it behind. Sable's Reach looked different from orbit than she remembered, quieter, greener in places where the war had never touched it. When the shuttle finally landed, the old pad cracked and worn under its weight. Dana was the first one out the door, moving faster than protocol technically allowed. The station itself was in ruins. Scavengers had stripped most of the useful equipment years ago, leaving broken panels and empty rooms behind. Dana walked past all of it without stopping, her eyes fixed on the open ground beyond the building, on the landing pad where she had said goodbye 6 years earlier. It was empty. For one terrible moment, standing there in the fading afternoon light, Dana felt something cold settle in her chest. 6 years was a long time. That was when she noticed the path. A worn line ran across the dry ground, smoothed down by what must have been thousands of footsteps, leading from the old shelter she had built years ago straight to the edge of the landing pad. It was too deliberate, too consistent, to be anything but a habit repeated over and over across a very long time. An old man appeared from the direction of the valley before she could think too hard about what the path meant. He introduced himself simply as Yannick and told her, in short, plain words, about a creature that had walked to this exact spot every single day for years, waiting for a ship that never came. Until, apparently, today. "He's usually here by now," Yannick said, glancing at the empty pad with a frown. "Something must have spooked him off today. Try the tree line." Dana did not wait to ask more questions. She walked toward the trees at the edge of the valley as the sky above began to shift into evening colors, calling out the only name that mattered, the sound she had made up years ago for a frightened, wounded hatchling she had found half buried in storm dust. "Kiv." For a long moment, nothing answered but wind moving through dry grass. Then, from somewhere deep in the tree line, came a sound she had not heard in 6 years, a soft, familiar clicking call, hesitant, uncertain, but unmistakably his. Dana's breath caught in her chest. She called his name again, softer this time, letting her voice carry the same warmth she had used the night she left, the tone that had nothing to do with words and everything to do with meaning. Branches shifted at the edge of the trees. A large shape stepped out slowly into the fading light, far bigger now than the small creature she remembered, wings folded tight against a body built for real flight, eyes fixed cautiously on her, uncertain whether to trust what he was seeing. Dana stood perfectly still, tears already falling before she had time to stop them, and waited, the way he had waited for her, for as long as it took him to decide she was really there. Trust, once broken by silence, does not return quickly, even when the person who broke it never meant to break it at all. Kiv stood at the edge of the tree line for a long time, watching Dana with careful, uncertain eyes, his wings still half raised, his body tense with the kind of caution that only comes from disappointment repeated too many times to count. Dana did not move toward him. She had learned enough about patience in the last 6 years to know better than to rush this moment. Instead, she stayed exactly where she was, arms loose at her sides, and spoke to him the way she used to, in a slow, steady voice that carried no urgency at all. "I know I took too long," she said. "I know you didn't understand why. I'm sorry, Kiv. I'm here now." He did not answer, of course, not in words he had never had, but his head tilted the way it always used to when her voice reached him. That same small motion she remembered from the very first weeks after she found him half buried in storm dust. Something in that motion told her the memory was still there, buried under years of routine and quiet waiting, but still there. He took one slow step out of the tree line, then another. Yannick, standing a respectful distance away near the old shelter, said nothing, simply watched with the quiet satisfaction of a man who had spent years wondering how this particular story might end. Kiv crossed the open ground between them slowly, stopping several times to watch Dana's face, as if checking, again and again, that she was not about to disappear the way she had before. Each time he stopped, Dana stayed still and let him look. She understood, in a way words could never fully explain, that this was not something she could hurry. He had waited every day for 6 years. She could wait a few more minutes. When he finally closed the last of the distance between them, he did not rush into her arms the way she half expected. Instead, he lowered his head slowly and pressed it gently against her shoulder, the exact motion he used to make as a small, wounded hatchling curling against her side on cold station nights. Dana wrapped her arms around his neck and held on, feeling 6 years of guilt and distance finally begin to loosen in her chest. The clicking sound came softly, right beside her ear, the same sound that had once meant hunger, or fear, or simple loneliness. This time, it sounded different. Softer, steadier, something closer to relief. They stayed like that as the last light faded from the sky, 2 figures standing together on a worn path that had been carved, step by step, out of years of unanswered patience. The resupply crew gave Dana strange looks when she finally returned to the shuttle with a fully grown Drailing walking calmly beside her, but no one said anything, not even the pilot, who had heard the whole story secondhand from Rourke before the mission even launched. It took another 2 months of paperwork, arguments, and more favors called in, but eventually, Dana secured what she had wanted for 6 long years, a permanent posting back at Sable's Reach, this time with real authority to protect both the station and the world around it. Rourke pulled the final approval through personally, telling her only that it was the least he owed the 2 of them after everything. The station was rebuilt slowly, piece by piece, with Yannick's help and, eventually, a small survey team that arrived to study the Drailing population properly, this time with Dana overseeing every decision to make sure no creature on this world would ever again be treated as less important than the mission around it. Every morning after that, Kiv still walked to the landing pad. It was habit now, worn too deep to fully disappear. But he was never alone there again. Dana walked beside him each time, watching the same sky he had watched for 6 long years, no longer waiting for a ship that might never come, but simply enjoying, together, the quiet, ordinary mornings they had both fought so hard, in such different ways, to finally share. And somewhere far beyond that valley, among people who told stories of the war and the strange bonds it created, this became known as the first tale of a woman and a creature bound not by words, but by a promise kept against every possible odd. The beginning of a partnership that would go on to shape the story of Sable's Reach for many years still to come.